Okay, we're live, everyone. So, welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Fontaine Richardson. I'm joined by my colleague, Brendan Carlson. We're members of Radicalization, a student-led counter-violent extremism organization that aims to educate the public about the topics of radicalization and extremism. On today's episode of Get Real, our series where we interview a variety of experts in the fields of radicalization and extremism, we are joined by Dr. Alexandra Bain. Dr. Bain received her Bachelor of Arts from Simon Fraser University and her Master's and PhD from the University of Victoria. She is a professor of religious studies at St. Thomas University, and in 2018, she co-founded Families Against Violent Extremism, FAVE, where she currently serves as the director. FAVE is a nonprofit volunteer organization that works to support the family members of individuals involved in violent extremism groups. The team at Realize Radicalization sincerely thanks Dr. Bain for agreeing to come on our show because we know you have a very busy schedule. So we're looking forward to a very interesting conversation today. And I'm going to start off with the first question now. So first off, what led you to become interested in the topic of violent extremism, and what inspired you to co-found an organization like FAVE?
Gracious. Good morning. Nice to meet you both. Thank you for asking me to join you. What led me to an interest in violent extremism was the loss of a close family friend in 2004, a young man who had come to Canada as a refugee from Eritrea in Northeast Africa, who was very, very close to our family, and who was convinced to leave his home where his mother had brought him and his escaping siblings out of a war in Eritrea to the safety of Canada. He turned around and walked right into a war in Chechnya and was killed within 6 weeks of getting there. His family didn't know he'd gone. His family didn't know what had happened to him. I helped the family for a year, try to understand what had happened. And to this day, his mom doesn't believe that he left to join a foreign war. She believes he's coming home. And what I noticed in the wake of that experience was that there was absolutely nothing that anyone could offer families of these people, that they were basically demonized and blamed for whatever their child or sibling did. And there was no recourse, no ability to get help. And often their lives then were broken and didn't get put together again. So I teach Islamic studies. I teach art and architecture. I teach the cultural aspect of Islam. But another area of my interest is this ideology that is growing out of Islam and has virtually become a new religious movement, and that is Salafi jihadism, which is this ideology that pulls young people away from their homes and families and leaves them in extremely dangerous places, usually at the result of a loss of life, and it doesn't need to happen. So I, after the Boston bombing, I think, in 2000 and what was it, 13? I think.
So long ago. I think that was.
That really floored me. I was recovering from spinal fusion surgery, and we were in Cuba trying to relax, and all I could do was sit and watch CNN and wonder how the hell some, young person who had all the opportunities, after such struggle in their homeland, to finally arrive in the United States and to be brought up in the United States. And then, bombing people, they could be other family members, they could have been teachers, they could have been friends. They were like fouling their own nest. They were doing something that not even animals do, right? Mm-hmm. Animals go out of their nest to drop a load. They don't foul their nests. But when you leave bombs at a marathon, in a public area near where you live, you're bombing your own people. So I was horrified, like completely to my core, horrified with that. And I wanted to know what would make young people do something like that. So I started to do a lot of reading. And then in 2014, I began a research project, and I went online. I learned how to use social media at a relatively old age, and I started contacting young English-speaking men, Canadians, but not only Canadians, Americans, Australians, Brits, people from United Arab Emirates, for example, whose at least almost first language was English, and started to talk to them and get to know them. And they weren't really interviews; they ended up being months-long conversations held over social media, usually by texting. And I got to know about 40 of them. Initially, it was a long conversation about religion and their religious justification for doing what they did, but that's natural because I teach Islamic studies and that's my area. So we were just sort of, I learned not to argue, but rather ask questions and leave the unanswerable questions with them to think about for a bit. And then in 2015, after gathering about 40 of those long-term interviews and about 50 long-term interviews with online supporters, they used to call themselves the Bakia family. Bakia is the Islamic chant for it's going to survive forever. We're going to survive forever. So they called themselves the Bakia family. And I interviewed them. I had conversations with them. And in 2015, I went with a woman I had met through this work, a woman named Christiane Boudreau, who had lost her son in Syria in 2014. Went and met with Mothers for Life, a group of European mothers who have all lost young people to this and who work together to support each other and then to try to encourage other families to open dialogues with their children and try to repair some of the hurt that's happened. And I decided to put my energy, instead of researching why this happened, into doing something about it. And my research led me to understand that while there are interior factors that can leave almost anyone vulnerable, there are things that happen to people. It's not things that you do. It's things that stop making the world make sense to you. Losing your mother at a young age, losing a young partner, suffering severe illness, suffering mental illness. There is some internal pressure that all of these young people feel. They're searching for an answer, for meaning. And then they find a perfect storm of a group of people who are willing to draw them in. Then they no longer listen to anything outside that circle, and they start this spiraling. And when the love bombing starts, which is what we used to call it in the 60s, when people in a cult would be love bombed, we love you, oh, we love you. It replaces, for these people, the family that most of them were having problems with in any case, and you lose them. And so I felt that what was important was that people continue to learn and be taught that this can happen in any family. There isn't anybody listening today who, maybe not they themselves, but somebody in their family. No one is completely inoculated from this kind of thing. It's a perfect storm, and it can happen to anyone. And that when it does happen, people, the general public, will turn away from you and consider you to be just as awful as the kid who went off and did these kinds of things. we're demonizing people. We're somehow believing that people who get caught up in these groups are no longer human beings like us, and we're allowing ourselves to do terrible things to them. In the case that I'm most concerned with, it's leaving those young people who either went off to join ISIS or were related to somebody who went off to join ISIS, or no matter how they got there. Throughout human history, they would have been referred to mostly as camp followers, people who, went off with the warriors who were going to fight, and their children. And these people, there are upwards of 50 Canadians stuck in the camps of Northeast Syria, detention and prison camps in Northeast Syria. Some of them have been there for 4 years. They are the most horrifying conditions that you can imagine. There's no clean water. The tents are made out of cotton. They haven't been replaced in 4 years. They fall down as soon as there's a rain. There's not adequate food. There's basically no medicine. They're expected to buy their own medicine, and yet their families aren't allowed to. The Canadian government will not allow them to send money, even for medicine or food. Wow. So Canada has demonized these people, now considers them not just not Canadian, but not human. And that's a huge problem, I think, in this day and age, to be able to do that. I go for understanding. I think it's more important to understand people and offer them an alternative. You can't convince someone out of this. You'll only make them dig their heels in harder. It's like dealing with somebody who supports, ending all vaccinations, and it's the same polarization that's happening. You've got people who just won't hear the other side at all, and who considers the other side to be less human than we are, and that's causing problems all over the world. So my aim is to try to get families to understand it's not their fault, but there are changes that they could make that will help this person go forward with it, and this person's children, because everybody in this group has small children. They need to be brought home so that they can be brought up, in a democratic setting where, use inside voices and share with your friends, and, one at a time, to take turns, all of this stuff, and have help with the excessive trauma that they've all been suffering. If we don't bring these people home, they'll grow up, or they'll either die, or they'll grow up, they'll speak perfectly clear Canadian English, unaccented, because of their parents, and they have every right in the world to a Canadian passport. And if they come home 10 years, 15 years from now, in their early 20s, and they've been treated like hell by their countries, and only heard ISIS propaganda, we have a lot to be concerned about. 25, 30 children coming home who've been brought up that way. We have a chance now to bring them home. Their grandparents certainly don't think that way. Their grandparents are desperate to get them home, and desperate to have them receive adequate medical care and adequate psychological counseling. And this is what we've done. Our organization has set up for each of the families across the country psychosocial services. So the services of trained psychologists and psychiatrists who can help them with trauma, help them with, many of them, social workers who will help them with moving, because they need to. It's almost like needing to go into the witness protection plan. They if they're identified as being who they are, their lives are in danger. So they need a lot of help, and they need a lot of recovery, and they're getting neither. The Canadian government has basically abandoned them in Syria.
Well, thank you.
Well, that's what I'm doing.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And it is interesting that, like, the dehumanization is happening on both ends, right? We are even doing it, obviously,
And
which is
it's incredible to
terrible.
see just how those dynamics work, where you decide to demonize them, and then this just creates further problems, alienation down the line more, and it's just propagating this destructive cycle. And it's incredible that policymakers in Ottawa are being blind to these dynamics going on.
They're more concerned with the political ramifications. They're more concerned about getting elected again. They have absolutely no care for these people at all, and they feel justified in doing that because they believe that the majority of Canadians, the vast majority of Canadians, don't care. And unfortunately, they're not far off the bat. It's really difficult to get people to understand why they should care about these kids, and even about their moms, and even about their dads, even about the guys who went. In Canada, we don't believe in capital punishment, so it almost seems as if, lacking the ability to do that, they're just quite willing to leave people there until they die.
Yeah, it's just like a different form of punishment, for sure, rather than just doing
It's
what they would.
unacknowledged. There has been no trial, no accusations. They haven't been charged with anything. They should be. Some of them should be. And having done the other research that I did, I'm a lot more comfortable if Canada brings home everybody, does thorough investigations, and then decides which amongst these people are deserving of jail terms. You've got to hope that there are programs that they are going to set up to help people like that in jail. I doubt it. And there are going to be a lot more of them. They're probably not going to be jihadists. They're more likely to be right-wing extremists now. But nevertheless, the problem continues. How do you reintegrate those people into society? Or if you're not going to, do you keep them in jail forever? How do you stop the ideas that they are, their ideology? How do you stop that ideology from spreading in prisons? Because it's a perfect ideology to live with as a prisoner. It gives you a sense of dignity and autonomy, and you are, being superior to everyone else and a group. And so it does spread in prisons. In fact, that's what the United States found out when they put the bulk of the jihadists from the fight in Iraq. They put them in camps such as Camp Bucca in Iraq. And they put all of the jihadists in camps together and thought, well, that'll keep them out of the way. What it did was give them a chance to talk to each other in a way that they never would have been able to do if they'd been out in the public. They couldn't have met because they're known people and they wouldn't be allowed to meet. And so instead, they were all put in the same prison, and that's now referred to as Jihadi University. That's where the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he was in Camp Bucca for 4 years. He was the leader of the men in Camp Bucca, and he was trusted by the Americans to do that, and given freedom. And so a lot of times people make some pretty silly mistakes. Those in authority make mistakes that come back to bite them in the butt, and it seems that they don't listen to people with experience and some understanding and a different point of view. And the reason that they don't listen is because, again, they want to be elected, and they're more concerned about being elected. There's also an awful lot of money in this business, in the business of countering and preventing violent extremism. There's a lot of organizations that have got a lot of money. and have done very little work. There was a whole bunch of money thrown at and this is not just in Canada, but in places where the point was to try to identify which young person was likely to go off and join. Well, you can't do that. And you can't target groups, marginalized groups, and expect that that's going to make it, target them for anti-terrorism talks. They just feel singled out and discriminated against, and it has to be any change that's going to come has to be systemic. It has to be for all young people. We need more mental health therapy in school, right in school. People need to learn good mental health practices when they're tiny, and it needs to be available throughout school. We're ignoring generations of students who are in serious pain. And I think it's going to come back and bite us as more and more and more of these conspiracy kind of groups become attractive.
Yeah.
The more pain you're in, the less you understand the world, the less you feel you're being heard, the more these groups seem attractive.
Especially in the current context that we're living through. I mean, we're currently living through a pandemic, right? I mean, the center didn't hold at all for people. No. People are completely lost. I even know I've been sent so many articles by people that I know, and I'm friends with, that are like, oh, the Canadian government is like, they're all communists and they're trying to inject you with these microchips, et cetera, et cetera. And they're just like average people, it's not like, people who are like the other, these are just people like anyone else that are just starting to buy into these conspiracy theories and going into these echo chambers online, which is obviously you're hearing everyone else is speaking the same kind of language as you and they all agree with you. I mean, like you were saying, that's the same thing that happens during the prisons, right? Everyone is getting together. They're finding out, oh, we have a lot in common. We dislike the same people. We buy into the same, not conspiracy theories to them, real things to them. And it's just seems like a recipe for disaster to me.
It is.
Especially, right now. It's just like, and there's like so much conflict and, obviously what's happening in Ukraine. And there's just so much to be worried about, I think, for young people. And I don't think the support is there at all.
I totally agree with you. I think we're in desperate need of much, much, much more support for young people. And I really hope that we get it much more support for families. Mm-hmm. This problem is every family who realizes that they have a young person who has fallen down a rabbit hole feels incredibly guilty and angry. And they don't know which one is stronger, and it rages within them. Am I angry with this person, or oh my God, what am I going to do? And it's my fault. And there are a lot of young people who have distressed families who have never chosen to go and join a group like this. So again, it's not the only factor in why somebody does this. But if you're looking at how to help, not how to stop it, this is now how to help once it's already happened, the person is going down or going, the best way to do that is to work with their family. Because there aren't a lot of people who are going to offer, and I'm speaking now of ISIS especially, but this is also to a certain degree true with jumping down the rabbit hole of COVID. Ultimately, the people who love you best and who are going to help you it's your family.
Yep.
In most cases. In some cases, that's not the case. In my case, it would not have been the case. I'm one of those people who, if I had decided to go down the rabbit hole, there would have been no help from my family. But I'm here to tell you that you can that's not going to stop you from living, from making changes and living a good and happy life. You don't have to have that. But if you can, if there's any hope of repairing the damage that's been done intergenerationally and between siblings, that's the very best place you can start, because nobody's going to give you, ideally, nobody's going to give you as much support as your family is. They're going to be the last ones, usually. And if they're not, that's okay. We have ways of dealing with that too. But we start with the family. And we start trying to help the family to understand how this person got there in their head, and the best ways of offering them an alternative. You can't argue them out of it. You can't argue someone out of an idea like this that they have so carefully, thought of and absorbed and are working on, and truly believe that anybody who thinks otherwise is, beyond reprehension. Fighting them about the ideology itself is pointless. You have to let them have enough experiences outside of the group that they begin to see that themselves. You have to offer them opportunities to have those cognitive dissonances where people are going, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And certainly the way ISIS behaved, the young people went over, joined because they thought it was a wonderful new world, a utopia, new caliphate, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And when they got there, boy, was it scary. And some of them, there's a young woman I know of who got excited and started screaming for people's heads just after her husband was killed. And so that made her even more angry. And she, but now, and the other women that I've spoken with, the beheadings and the horror, you weren't allowed to say anything, because if you said to another ISIS person that you disagreed with that, you found yourself in ISIS prison. So that made it kind of hard.
Yeah.
But it was their lived experience that made them start reassessing the thinking. And that's what you have to do, is that you have to offer people alternative experiences and offer them a group that replaces their ISIS family. They have to want to leave in the first place. If they don't want to leave, there's nothing that you can do.
Yep.
And so anybody who says, and there are people who say they have de-radicalization programs, and they're I don't know, a former person themselves, and they're going to sit down and they're going to talk to them and they're going to argue with them about all the different hadith and different surahs and different ayats in the Quran, and they're going to proof text the whole thing, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. That's not what they need. Maybe some people need someone down the road so that they can say, hey, can I ask you some sort of questions about interpretation? But that's only once they've gotten to the point where they've let go of the group emotionally, and have something to replace it with.
Yeah, that can't be an initial step at all.
Right? It's about group bias. It's about walking into another group, wanting to attach yourself to them, and being pulled away from the rest of your group. One of the first things that ISIS people do is cut you off from your family. Cut you off from it's a cult, right? Mm-hmm. Cut you off from everybody that you knew and care about.
Yeah.
And the only way back is by reconnecting. If you have the ability, if your parents are still alive, if your siblings are still alive. If you aren't, then there's, we can't invent parents for you.
No.
But we can try to give a lot of love and find people who can connect with people, and a good psychologist helps. A mentor, help in getting job education. Like, what kinds of jobs are there? None of those problems caused the person to go over. But continuing to leave the problems outstanding doesn't give them much reason to come back. So that's what that's what Families Against Violent Extremism does. We wait for the families to come to us. The only time we would reach out to a family is if another family has said, here, there's these people, and they're scared and they want you to reach out. Then we'll do that. But we wait until people want the help, and we're really small. I'm led to believe that there are several government organizations who think that we're a huge hydra-headed organization with tentacles reaching across the country, and this is kind of it. This is where I sit, and I take the time. I'm not teaching, and I spend it on the phone with people. I deal with lawyers. I found families lawyers. I work with the Kurds, who are the people who are holding them. So I've developed relationships with the Kurds. I'm trying to convince the Canadian government to talk to the Kurds, and that's like pulling chicken's teeth. I've set up connections with psychosocialist organizations that offer help across Canada. So every family who's with FAVE, and there are about 15 of them, has been hooked up with people and the families are quite free to go and get mental health counseling beforehand themselves, because anybody who's been through, I'm traumatized now from listening to the women in the camp on daily. We have one who's been on a hunger strike a couple of times. The Canadian government has admitted that they should bring her home. They've refused to bring anyone else home. They say the only reason is medical. We did have an orphan brought home a year and a half ago. It took us a year and a half to convince the Canadian government to bring a 4-year-old orphan home from the camp. The Canadian government didn't do anything to locate her in the camp. It was us working with the Kurds, and we worked with her family. And it took the Canadian government a year and a half to get her home.
And what was their rationale for taking that long? Was it just bureaucratic processes, or was it, again, that kind of politicization?
They use the bureaucratic processes to put off doing anything. So at first, their argument is, we can't speak to you about whoever the person is, because we don't have their permission to speak to you. It's privacy, and it's like, well, yes, you don't have the opportunity to speak to them because they're in a camp, and you won't phone them. You will not contact them at all. So, we actually got into the camps and got signatures from the people, and came back to Canada with the signatures of the people saying, we have the signature of people, you have to talk to us. And so, they slowly begin to talk, but then they say, well, yes, we agree. We do have to talk to you. So we will tell you there's nothing we can do, because we can't get in the country because it's too dangerous. And we have no consular assistance there. So Canada hasn't had consular assistance in Syria since, 2011. So they put their hands up and say, we can't do anything. We can't, unless they can get to a Canadian consulate outside of Syria, where there's nothing we can do for them. Well, they can't get out because they're being held prisoner. And the only way the Kurds are holding them prisoner because they want all of the governments to come and acknowledge that the Kurds are in charge of this area. Again, that's political on their end. They're using our people as hostages for their own state building. Everybody has a reason. But at the same time, they're terrified. The Kurds are terrified because ISIS has attacked a prison recently. ISIS is not gone. They're in the area. They want to liberate these people, which we should be very worried about, because we don't want them liberated by ISIS.
No.
The ones who have genuinely de-radicalized will be killed. And talking to a woman who the government has decided she should be coming home because she is so ill. and yet the government does not bring her home. And so she's ill at death's door physically, and her mental state is deteriorating extremely fast because of the way the government is treating her. After having said, yes, they should bring her home, but then doing nothing about it and simply saying it's too dangerous to go in there. But journalists from all over the world treat it like a fishing barrel they can shoot fish in. You want an interview? Go to Syria. Go interview one of the terrorists. And they go in and they have access to these people who have no right to say no. And even when they do say no, are often told by unscrupulous researchers, oh, we'll help you get out.
Wow.
And so they get their interview and they go home pleased with themselves. And, it has an effect on the people in the camp who gave the interviews.
I find that just so alarming that, we've all received kind of the news, basically. I guess it's a common conception that ISIS is like somehow dead, or like it has no power over, you know what I mean? Like it's something we don't hear about anymore. It was, all the rage to talk about ISIS, whatever. And then suddenly just like almost, unless you go on like certain like networks or, on like academic Twitter or something like that, you almost don't really hear it in the mainstream media, any talk about it. And like,
that's one of the problems with mainstream media, is that their attention span is extremely short. They have to fill in all kinds of news every day, and so stories fall off and it's still going on. Those people are still there in the desert and they're dying. I think maybe when the first Canadian dies, you'll hear about it again, and that might not be too much longer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's just it's so concerning. I mean, I haven't even heard like a huge amount of this. It's absolutely crazy how it hasn't really reached mainstream media. And you're right, the attention span is so short. It's right now it's Ukraine, and then a month later, whatever, something else is going to grab people's attention.
Ukraine is a very interesting example. Over the past several decades, countries in the Middle East and Africa have been invaded, and the people have been bombed. It's still going on in Syria, Iraq, Yemen. The list goes on. And nobody threw their doors open and invited people to come and live with them. Nobody gave them 2 free years and you can work and just come. Syrians and Palestinians and Iraqis and people from Yemen watching what's happening. They understand better than anyone else what the Ukrainian people are going through. But they're left with a huge hole in their hearts, thinking that, what was wrong with us? Why are we still in camps and, being locked out of countries? When what is it? Because they're white and European? Yes.
Yeah, I guess it's all about that othering that's happening, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's happening to people like us now, right? Yeah. Before it was a different group. It was a distinct group. It was another. It was nothing like me or my family.
Not like real. They don't count. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're one of those other people.
Yeah.
Group bias is something that as human beings we've needed. Because the way that we grew, our brains grew, and we evolved, is very cool. It started with cooking, because we could get the food that we ate pre-digested, and we'd get more nutrients, and it made our brain grow. The other thing we did with cooking is that we started to do it together and sit and eat. And most animals, if they're eating and you show them their teeth, they will bite you. But we turned it into our central ritual that we do with each other that binds us together, which is sharing a meal and talking and laughing. Yeah. And who's in your group, knowing who's in your group and is going to have your back when we were like about 150 people in a community, knowing who's outside the community and who's not going to be nice to you necessarily was really important. So having group bias was part of the way that we as human beings moved forward. But it's become so dangerous now that, you know, we're sitting here. We got through another weekend, looks like, and there's been no nuclear lobbing of a weapon somewhere. But it's looking like it's not going to be much longer if they keep going on this way. I think it's really time we took a look at group bias and did everything we could. And it has to start with kids. We have to start, you know, we've made lots of changes and we've used education to put it through. For example, when I was little, nobody wore seatbelts. You'd stand up in the back seat, right? You'd punch your brother.
That's
and
so weird to think about.
And it was like, but nobody ever said put a seatbelt on. And when it started, it was like, what? Oh, come on, I'm not going to do that.
Wow.
And over time and education, you don't get into a car without putting your seatbelt on. Now, they did have to turn it into a rule, and we did have to follow it. But when you think about it, some things we have to be taught, but you still have to do it while you're being taught. You have to see the benefit of it. If we have a medical system that will pay for you when you get broken, then the least you can do is wear your seatbelt. So that we don't all have to pay. These are things that we do for the common good of everybody. Kind of like getting COVID shots.
Yeah, we've the common good has been something that's really been, you know, just especially
and these COVID, kids who went off to join ISIS understand that about us.
Yeah, that
right?
Just like
they think they were going off to do the common good. They thought that this is the way to be. They just got suckered in, and they got suckered in by, you know, older people from Iraq who used to be the Ba'ath Party, and then the United States disbanded the military, and all these guys had nothing to do. So they grew beards and put religious garb on and started Allahu Akbaring and started to convince Western kids to come over, because that's one hell of a PR stunt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely very interesting that we've seen that kind of concept of, like, you know, certain people aren't willing to do anything unless they see the direct benefits to it. I mean, obviously we've seen that with COVID, but then also with what you were talking about, right? You know, it doesn't directly benefit me that somebody gets rescued from Syria, right? Because that's somebody else and that's their family, and, you know, they're probably screwed up or something like that, and it wouldn't happen to me. So it doesn't benefit me. No. You know, why should I be paying for it? I think that's like a lot of people's mentality. If it doesn't directly impact them, they have no interest in it, unfortunately.
It's interesting how
very concerning.
It's really interesting how that feeling seems to be getting stronger, despite the fact we have social media where we can actually get to know people from other places. You know, before you'd have to have a pen pal and write them a letter, and it took, you know, you'd get weeks and weeks and you get your pen pal's letter back. But now, you know, we can be working with people from different countries. We can be cooperating with them. We can learn about them. And I think that's really important. I think more exposure to each other is really important. I think teaching critical thinking is really important. I'm kind of shocked at the extent to which that seems to be going out the window. It's sometimes hard to teach first-year course when you know, critical thinking skills haven't been built through elementary and high school. That's something I kind of find a bit spooky. I spend a lot of my time teaching students to you know, ask way more questions. They seem to always want, makes me laugh. Dr. Bain, is that on the exam? Well, we don't have exams, and if you'd read your course outline, we don't have exams. I don't expect. It's a religious studies course. Perish the thought there is a right or wrong answer. Fill in the blank. I want you to think. And how do you think? You develop the ability to make better questions, right? You take what your received notions that you came to class with, that's what you've learned from everything that you've done, and then you start picking at them and challenging them. And how do you do that? You find other evidence. You do research. And then when you find something that you think looks good, where does it come from? Who wrote it? Who is that person? Why did they write it? What were their assumptions that they had when they began writing it? What kind of sources did they gather? Where are they from? Where are those sources from? Are they primary sources? Did the person have to learn a language to read them? Do they know that language? There's like a gazillion questions that people should be reading and thinking about when they set off to learn about something. But people now get the sense that you can learn about something just by opening your whatever it is, Reddit or whatever, however you all do it, and just sort of patter whatever the last person said.
Yeah, critical consumption of media is something that I find it alarming. I've had so many chats with people that, are suddenly an expert on this because they saw one TikTok on it, or they read one Twitter thread, right? So now they know all the nuances of a situation, or, they're not critically checking where they're getting the information from. People see a headline and they automatically assume it's fact.
Right.
Even if the source is Russia Today or something like that.
Right.
It's just people aren't critically looking at their sources and figuring out what kind of media they're consuming and who's it for, and who published this and who does it benefit. Now people are just accepting stuff at face value, right? And it's leading to so much polarization, making it worse.
Yeah, it is.
It is concerning to see. I mean, have you found any effective strategies, at least for you, to kind of teach kind of critical consumption of media to your students?
I just do it. It's not just, it's with all sources. So yes, when students write, when they write a paper, if it's a research paper, or if it's a reflection paper, they still need to have sources, and they need to tell me, who are these sources? And that's the case whether it's a podcast or a news article, or who wrote it, whose voice is this? Everybody's voice has a we all have a bias. It's what we've come, the layering, what we grew up understanding, and then everything that we've brought to that ourselves and worked through. At the end of it, that's a bias. At least that's how I explain it to students. And then there's prejudice, which means you're not going to let any more information in. Your bias can change. That's, and it does change. It's still a bias because you don't have all the information in the world on whatever it is. And, if once you do, well, you're never going to. So you have to keep checking your own bias. It's like part of your job. I think that's what I teach students. It's always part of your job. Who are you? It's not just who's the person writing, but who are you to ask the questions? When you decide you want to say something, write, explain yourself. Okay, who are you? And what do you bring to the questions? What are your assumptions first? Check your own assumptions.
I think we have individual bias towards ourselves. We think we're an objective source. Definitely people think I'm completely objective. I don't come from any particular background that's going to affect me or anything like that. I don't have I haven't done any research beforehand. Anything, people assume they're a blank slate when they start to read these articles.
And they're so not.
Nobody is. No matter how learned you are absolutely have biases that you have to check.
I find in a lot of cases, people conduct research or look into research questions on the premise of trying to fulfill their implicit assumptions going into the situation, right? They look and research different issues in global politics or what else is going around in the world at the time, on the basis of trying to reinforce their original thoughts on it instead of questioning their own biases, right?
You don't learn that. You don't learn much that way.
No, for sure.
No, you just
when you're just
reinforce everything that you know have brought in.
Yeah, you just want to.
My understanding of our purpose of being on the planet, you know, is to learn. And I enjoy the moments when I realize that I have been thinking a certain way, and then I add more information or someone else's argument, and all of a sudden pop that wonderful moment when you go, oh, there is another way of looking at this, and I wasn't seeing that. And it's allowing your mind to open. And I think what's happening is, instead of people looking for that moment, which doesn't mean you're looking to change your mind, you're looking to be open, to be able to see another point of view, because only at that point can you decide, does that other point of view make sense to you? But if you're still at the point where you're not listening, you're not letting it in, you slow your mind down. And you know, life is you've got this brain and you get to use it, and for 70, 80 years if you're lucky. And so why not use it? Why just stick with what you think all the time? You know,
I think people are kind of scared, though, to find information that almost goes against their worldview, because they've built so much of their identity around, their understanding of a topic. And then to untangle that from yourself is like such a process, and a lot of people aren't willing to do that.
That's what a person in a cult feels like. That's only kind of worse, because now when they're first going, they know that the rest of the world is looking at them and going, that for some people keeps them in there, keeps them in the cult. But other people, when they have this cognitive dissonance, when they go, then they have all that, I can't learn, because when I learn, I've invested so much in this group, in this behavior, in this ideology. What's going to happen to my brain? I don't know. I don't think anybody ever died of changing their mind. Well, I'm sure they have, but that's not true. I'm sure people have made stupid decisions all the time, but not by opening your mind and allowing yourself the possibility of, trying to understand what that person is arguing, their argument.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't mean you have to accept it. It just means you have to understand it. And that's what I'm trying to do by studying these young people. I'm not accepting Salafi jihadism. I've been a Muslim for 40 years. I'm not in any need of accepting Salafi jihadism, but I understand it, and I understand why it's attractive to them. And if I didn't understand that, it would be very difficult for me to deal with these people.
Yeah. So we're almost approaching an hour here, so I'll just ask a final question before we end things off. So in your opinion, what do you think is the biggest misconception surrounding the families of those involved in violent extremism is?
That they caused it themselves, that they're somehow implicated. Most of the families I've spoken with had absolutely no idea that this was happening to their young person. Sometimes an increase in religiosity is seen as a really good thing if the person was troubled before and acting out, taking drugs, whatever. One mom of a convert was delighted that her son had embraced Islam. He became polite and respectful and treated her well. And then started not coming to see her as often as before, and wouldn't bring friends to the house, and began to show things that were not tied in with joining Islam, but rather evidence that he had become involved in a group that had some pretty far out ideas. So yeah, I think it's that the parents are somehow responsible. It's funny, people will say this, grown-ups will say this, well, if my, obviously it's the family. It's like, why should you care about their family? Well, God forbid you should ever be in that position yourself, because you'd know how they'd feel. They did nothing. So they didn't talk to the kid very well when they were teenagers, and they, I don't know, maybe nothing different than the rest of us who have difficult relationships with our families.
I think, though, when you do that, I think it's almost like a protective mechanism for some people, because when you say it couldn't happen to me, right, you're almost like,
right. And they don't want to have anything to do with these people because maybe it's contagious.
Yeah.
It's not contagious. It's not their fault. It's certainly the fault of the young person. They made their mind up. They made their choices, and the choices that they made were really unfortunate. And there are consequences to making such choices. But they're not demons. They're not inhuman. They made really bad mistakes. They got in with a bad crowd. And if they want to come back, it says more about us as a society that we would be willing to take them back and help them, to recover and move on. So, and make sure that their children are well taken care of, so that it doesn't become generational.
Yeah. I was going to say, these type of grievances definitely get passed along from generation to generation. Just from my personal experience, a lot of my family went to residential schools, and obviously, even if people didn't directly go, they're hearing about this from their family, right. And that grievance is just going on and on. It's being just perpetuated within families.
It's the same thing with these families. It can go either way. Depending on the point of view of the family. Some families completely abandon these people, just don't want to have anything to do with them ever again. And that's really sad. And, it's sad because they have other kids in the families, and the other kids are watching how this is dealt with. The way we're behaving right now to these people, to these Canadians, these Canadian children, especially in Syria, we're being like ISIS. That's dividing the world. That's exactly what ISIS does that is against Islam. ISIS divides the world into two: good believers and everybody else. And everybody else is enemy and deserves to die. Mm-hmm. Well, how is that not like what we've done, leaving these people in a Syrian camp to die? Little babies, little kids. We're supposed to be, Mr. Selfie there with his, we're supposed to be human rights oriented and, rights of the children. And we're all about rights until it comes to Canadians who have behaved abominably and acted stupidly and done things that are illegal. So a whole lot of other Canadians have done that too.
Yeah.
And and they will be in jail, and we have security services who can deal with that. But for God's sake, bring the kids and the moms home and give people a chance to stand in court and defend themselves and say they're sorry and make reparations.
Mm-hmm. I think it's more convenient for people to view the world in binary terms. That I'm not like that. I would never do that.
Convenient, but dangerous.
Yeah, no, of course not. Not advocating that it's a good thing in any way.
Yeah, but I do see it. It's nice to have young people be interested in this and ask questions, though. That's reassuring. So delighted you folks are doing this work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it was such a pleasure to talk. We kind of just touched on any kind of everything and anything today, which was great. I mean, we talked about Islam, we talked about group biases. We talked about critical consumption of media. So I'm happy that we just kind of touched on everything, and I thought everything was just fantastic, and really appreciate you taking the time, out of your busy schedule. So I'm going to end the broadcast now. So technically it'll stop recording, but I think we'll all remain on the call. So
thank you so much.
Okay. It was such a